All right, episode 6 of Ahsoka is out. This was a snooze fest, even though there was multiple moments that should have been really impactful and big moments. But because they've done nothing with the characters all season, they really fall flat. So this is the Ahsoka show, as you may or may not have forgotten at this point. And this little 2-minute conversation is the only part of the episode she's in. So pretty much they're just in the space whale for this whole episode. Which, fine, they have to hyperspace to another galaxy. I don't know exactly how long that takes because it seems like a really inconsistent part of the Star Wars universe is how fast you can get through hyperspace. But this whole part, honestly, is just completely unnecessary because they want to talk about ancient stories. And it's kind of Ahsoka just complaining that Sabine didn't make the tough decision. And then Hu Yang says, "Why don't you tell a story?" And she says, "Why don't you?" And he says, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." You know, having your own show reference itself is just so obnoxious. So they come out of hyperspace in Peridia, and there's great witches here, which is a retcon from Clone Wars and Rebels, where they said that Palpatine wiped them all out because he didn't like, essentially, people who could challenge his power. That's obviously how he operated. So, whatever, retcon their own stuff. They're in another galaxy. They talk about how these witches were the first ones to travel through hyperspace, and they used the whales and whatever. So they're here for Thrawn, obviously, and they're working for Thrawn. And I don't really understand why, but pretty much their goal was just to get back to the galaxy. Baylan, I skipped it in the images, but Baylan talked to Sabine while she's in prison. She's like, "Hey, we had a deal," and he just doesn't really say anything. He still intends to keep the deal because what we're going to find out in a few minutes is that Thrawn is going to let her go look for Ezra with the hopes of executing both Sabine and Ezra. And possibly the two mercenaries is how she refers to Baylan and Shin. Sabine gets put in jail here because the witches say that it reeks of Jedi. So they put her in a cell until Thrawn gets there. And really, this is all kind of stuff that is just dragged out. This episode I thought was super boring, even though there should have been some really big moments with Thrawn's return and Ezra's return. And we get a little conversation here between Baylan and Shin, where they're sort of reminiscing about how he grew up in the temple and how this galaxy had stories of legend that kind of turned into folk tales, but no one really believed him anymore. And Shin doesn't know any of this because she didn't grow up in the temple. He took her in after Order 66, presumably. You know, it's an alright conversation. Probably takes a lot longer than it should. Ray Stevenson is still pretty much the highlight of this episode. I thought Ahsoka was going to be more expressive, but she's back to being bored. And she's also non-existent in this one. And then Sabine is just given maybe the worst writing of anyone in the show. And I don't really understand a lot of these decisions. I'm going to get to in a little bit here. Morgan Elsbeth talks to the witches. They say to wait for Thrawn. They still have a Star Destroyer, which I'll be honest, I don't really understand how that works. It's been a while since I watched the Rebels finale. But from what I remember, Ezra and Thrawn are the only ones on the ship, and the space whales, or the Purrgil, like wrap the whole ship up and then they jump into hyperspace. So it's only Ezra and Thrawn, and that's how he was able to get rid of them. So I don't really understand why he has this big group of stormtroopers. They have a stormtrooper who has like a Roman mask on his face instead of like the regular stormtrooper helmet. Don't really understand that either, other than I guess they think it looks cool, even if it doesn't make any sense. So Elon Thrawn is... I liked Lars Mikkelsen for the voice acting for Thrawn in the show, and he's got a good voice. He just does not look like Thrawn to me. So in Rebels, we see Thrawn training like consistently, and now you can see that guy's mask on the right that I was talking about. No clue why he has that. But we see Thrawn training consistently for combat. He's always physically fit. Lars just doesn't look like he's in shape at all. And I don't know if he's just too old or he didn't lose weight for the role or what. And he just doesn't really have sort of the presence that I think Thrawn should have. But part of that's not his fault because they haven't done anything to build up Thrawn this season, especially if you haven't watched Rebels and stuff. And in the books, Thrawn is super intelligent. He's always using art and multiple layers of tactics and predicting his enemies. And here, they kind of just make him like, he's referred to, but he's kind of dull. And I don't think they're going to make him smart like they should. Well, I don't think they're capable of making him really crafty and intelligent the way that he's supposed to be. And he's also, if you've read the most recent Timothy Zahn trilogy, he starts out in exile in the first chapter of the book. It's just called Star Wars Thrawn. It's a good book. And he's a warrior. Like, he's physically fit and fighting stormtroopers and stuff to start the book. And he's using hit and run tactics. He's not like bulldozing them. But still, like, he's very capable. And presumably that book is only between 10 and 15 years earlier than this in the show. So the fact that he looks like this is just really jarring for me. And also, they have this conversation here where he talks to Sabine. And obviously he recognizes Sabine from Rebels because they had a lot of run-ins throughout the show. They give him this dialogue that I thought was super cringy, where he's telling Sabine that she risked her whole galaxy for Ezra Bridger. And it makes him sound like he knows that he's supposed to be the villain. And it's weird because in the books, I don't know if this is ever explained in Rebels the cartoon, but at least in the books, which reference the Rebels cartoon, so I assume they're canon, he works for the Emperor and promises to do what he can for the Emperor, even over the Chiss. But his ulterior motive, obviously, is to kind of use the Empire's resources to protect the Chiss also. So he's not just some super evil guy. Maybe in Heir to the Empire, it's different. But from what I've only read the first book so far, and I didn't get the impression that he's just evil. He's just tactical and ruthless. But he's treating it like a job. And this, the way that he's talking is like, I'm the danger to the galaxy. I'm the bad guy. I mean, really, all he needs is like a twirling mustache here. So they had this conversation where Thrawn says that he's going to give her this wolf dog alien thing, provisions, and her weapons, and she can go find Ezra. And then when she walks off, he tells Baylan and Shin, you guys can follow her and then eliminate both of them. And then he tells Morgan Elsbeth, I don't care if they all get stranded here because then they're just out of the way. Which I think is weird to throw away resources like that. Like, even if he doesn't like the Jedi, because he refers to them as tainted or flawed, they are still useful as warriors. So it really doesn't make any sense to be like, yeah, screw them, let them get stranded here. And that's the kind of stuff that I just don't think is appropriate for Thrawn. Like, he's not a personal vendetta motivated guy. He's all about efficiency and tactics. So Sabine starts her expedition for Ezra and runs into bandits. They refer to them as bandits. And these people are called Noti, I think. Noti. And obviously they're aliens to this galaxy. So they attack her. She ends up having to use her lightsaber, kills them all, and she's on her way. And the combat here was very meh, pretty slow. I'm pretty sure at one point she deflects a blaster shot back at them and kills them, which is really irritating because, again, she's becoming force sensitive, I guess. And she did use the force earlier in the show to start trying to move these rocks. So I guess that's just where we're headed, is she's going to become a full-blown Jedi Mandalorian, which is just such ridiculous retconning. And the fact that they're trying to do this everyone can be a Jedi thing is just nonsense. So I skipped a little conversation with Thrawn and Morgan where he says, I don't care if they all get stranded here as long as they're out of the way. And that they need like 3 days to move their supplies. They don't say what they are. I'm just assuming it's food and weapons and whatever, because he does have soldiers somehow. So they have to get all their stuff moved so they can travel back to the galaxy with it. And here is like a complete waste of time of the show. And it's also completely stupid. Is Sabine is mad at this wolf dog thing for running off. And she's like, no, go away. And it's like, he's the mount that you can ride to save your own energy to look around a whole planet for Ezra. And also we find out later he has a really good sense of smell because he's pretty much an alien dog. And also he can carry your provisions and weapons and stuff for you. So this is just a really stupid thing that's supposed to be funny, and it's just not. So much of this show just feels like filler. And this is like a 2-minute scene of her just yelling at this dog. And then eventually she's like, okay, fine, come on. So luckily she brought the dog with her. The dog wants to sniff around, and he sniffs what look like rocks. And they're actually these weird hermit crab alien things. And these hermit crab alien things recognize the logo on Sabine's armor because they have it too. So we know that they know Ezra. And I'm going to get into how fucking retarded this all is in just a minute here. We see Baylan and Shin. They're following Sabine. Not sure why they didn't just stick a tracker in the dog or on her stuff or whatever, but fine. I guess they're just following her on foot because everyone's a moron in this show. So these little hermit crab people take Sabine back to their temporary camp thing, and there's Ezra Bridger. And there's just so much about this that's so fucking stupid. So first of all, Sabine keeps talking to the alien that doesn't understand Basic, and she just keeps talking like if she just talks louder, it'll understand her. And anyway, I mean, beyond that, we have the obvious convenience of the first thing that she runs into, besides bandits, takes her straight to Ezra. She rode this dog thing for like half a day. Thrawn has a couple squads of men, and presumably they have a bunch of these mounts, and they just didn't look for Ezra. I mean, at a minimum, they're out here from before A New Hope to whenever this takes place in the lore, which I think is like 6 years after Return of the Jedi. So somewhere in the neighborhood of a decade. And Ezra is just hanging out with hermit crab people, and Thrawn just doesn't go after him, even though he's presumably a threat or a potential resource. Another change I don't understand, Ezra's hair was blue in Rebels, like bright blue, and they just let this guy have his natural hair color. Kind of a weird choice. It just seems really lazy to me. Like everyone else, they stuck with how they originally looked for the most part. And their reunion, which should be a pretty emotional thing. I mean, they had 4 seasons together in Rebels. You know, Ezra fought for her home planet for, and all kinds of stuff they went through together. And he's like, oh, it took you long enough. And it's just like there's no emotion here. They had this weird little back and forth, and then they hug each other like they're being held hostage, honestly. I don't understand what this decision is. If in the show, like you've shown Sabine sadly sitting around missing Ezra. She goes all the way to get this orb thing with Ahsoka. She wants to go through her Jedi training again. She flies to another galaxy to try to find him and also sacrifices essentially keeping Thrawn away from their galaxy to even have a chance to find him. She doesn't even know if he's alive. And their reunion is just like, oh, hey. You know, it's like kids who see each other after summer in school when they've been apart for like 2 months are way more excited than this. These two haven't seen each other in like a decade. And there's no crying. Even the hugging looks really uncomfortable. There's just this weird little small talk, and then they hug. And it's really underwhelming. And something else that was underwhelming that I forgot to mention earlier was when Thrawn was introduced, all the soldiers like chanting Thrawn, Thrawn, Thrawn. And it's this really big spectacle. And again, it's just out of character for Thrawn's personality. Like he wants to win, he wants to do it efficiently. He's not into spectacle and theater and dramatics. It's just completely out of character. And then the fact that the only explanation that we get for Ezra not being killed by Thrawn or captured here is at the end of this conversation, he says, oh, well, we move around, so let's help him get packed up. So they just pack up, and I guess they move their little campers, but I don't believe for a second that these little hermit crab people could have avoided Thrawn and a whole bunch of stormtroopers if they wanted to. And not to mention, it looks like they have a Star Destroyer that functions even if they can't jump back to their own galaxy. So this is just completely ridiculous on every level that in half a day with a mount, Sabine finds Ezra right away. As far as the casting for Ezra, I don't really have an issue. It's really hard to say what he would look like in 10 years, and he kind of has tan skin in the show. The blue hair thing I really don't understand though, because that just seems like laziness to me. So here's that awkward hug, and you can see how uncomfortable they look. And it just lacks any kind of emotion or being overwhelmed or anything. Like they both just kind of smile and slowly hug each other. Super weird. And also Sabine is just a total asshole at the end of this conversation too. So this is near the end of the conversation, and Ezra says something along the lines of, I'm glad that I did it, at least it worked and the galaxy's safe. And Sabine kind of makes a face and he goes, it did work, right? And she goes, can we just not talk about that now? I'm just glad to see you again. And it's like, you're just going to gloss over the fact that you set up for Thrawn to go back to the galaxy after Ezra risked his life and wasted 10 years of his life to keep Thrawn away. And she just ignores that after it was her fault that he's here to begin with, or that she gave them access to this galaxy to begin with. And also it's pretty important for him to know that Thrawn's going to leave in a day or two. And also you guys might get attacked any minute by mercenary Jedis or dark Jedis or whatever they're supposed to be. So all of this just makes Sabine a huge dick. Like I'm fine with her having flaws. She messed up in Rebels pretty frequently. It's actually a big part of her backstory is that she created a weapon that was able to kill the Mandalorians even in their armor. So it was a big deal that the Emperor was able to attack them because of a weapon that she helped create, because she thought she was protecting them, which is a good backstory. But for her just to be a dick every step of the way, which she has been in this show, it just makes her unlikable at some point. And then near the end of the episode here, we see Thrawn. He finds out that Ahsoka is on the way, and the witches say that they're on Travelers, which are the Purgle. And Thrawn's pissed off and essentially blaming Morgan and the Jedi because he was assured that she was dead. And that's pretty much where we end off with this one. So yeah, this episode for me was just incredibly boring. And the moments that should have been powerful were really underwhelming. I think Thrawn was miscast, even though I like his voice. I wish they would not make Sabine make every bad decision along the way possible. I hope that we get to see more of Ezra, because I'm assuming that this season is going to end with them losing and Thrawn making his way back to the main galaxy. unless they don't think they're going to do multiple seasons, and then I guess it'll end with Thrawn getting beat, and then Ahsoka and Sabine and Ezra all fleeing together. Either way, there's only 2 episodes left. There's been a colossal amount of time wasted this season. This episode had a ton of just this really drawn out scenes and the same stiff, drawn out dialogue and all the same issues it's had all season. All the unnecessary theatrics for Thrawn, and it's frustrating to watch. And it's frustrating because they're just wasting good character after good character and, cameos, and all of it has just been pissed away. Very disappointing. And I really don't expect much from these last 2 episodes, except Ahsoka's going to show up in her whale. I assume her, Ezra, and Sabine will beat Balon and Shin, and that's kind of what it's looking like. I don't really know after that what they're going to do with Thrawn exactly. So yeah, I guess that's it for me for this one. All right, if you're here, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.